So big disclaimer. This is the first time you're going to see it. So far, there's only like 5 people in the world that has seen it. And this disclaimer is that things are ever evolving. The framework that I'm going to show you has been evolved 4 times, thanks to the feedback by a lot of practitioners in the industry. And it's going. If there's any changes, I will let you know. I'll email it to you, and you can watch it again because you paid for it anyway. And when there are updates, I will let you know, and then you can learn more. You can learn from my mistake and also learn what's the new framework. So this framework is not a be all and all. It's continuously improving. However, whatever you have right now, it's a very holistic system. It has gotten very good feedback by academics. So if there is any improvement, I will let you know. But this is good enough to go. And things to note. So firstly, although they all seem they all seem to have equal weights, but all of these variables have different weights. Some are more significant than the other. So for example, there's governance versus safety. So governance is a lot more important than safety, and these variables have different significance. Also do note that not every variable is equally important, and not every variable is applicable to your project. So it really depends on your token ecosystem, your token use case, token function, business model. Not everything is related, or not everything is applicable. So I just want to have all the variables out there so you can pick and choose whatever you need. And this is the model. So this is the token economics framework. And you can see there's 3 different pillars. You've got market design, mechanism design, token design. This is something that I've been talking about all the time. I think people might be sick of hearing it. So in market design, we're looking at thickness. How do we increase thickness? So thickness is by increasing thickness, we're trying to increase network effects as well. How do we reduce congestion? How do we increase safety so people can use the system? And market design is really defining the environment in which your tokens will exist, your ecosystem will exist. So defining the environment. Mechanism design, token design, they're both part of the mechanism, as in part of defining the architecture and structure of your ecosystem. But I divided them out into mechanism design, where you don't need tokens, where no tokens are involved, and token design, where tokens are involved. This is because sometimes your ecosystem don't need a token, but there are also other things to consider. The market design and mechanism design is still they're both very relevant to your ecosystem. You just ignore the token design part. So in mechanism design, we're looking at governance. So the consensus protocols, the different resolution mechanism, the non-financial incentives such as voting protocols, the allocation mechanism, the structure like bargaining protocols, as well as community information. So your oracles, your your token curated registries, and information from the community. So because we're looking at a decentralized structure and how can you create that. Then we're also going to look at token design. So in token design, we're going to look at token policy, so such as monetary policy and different valuation. But I'm not talking about valuation from an external point of view. I'm talking about valuation from within the ecosystem. We've got financial incentives. You're looking at the different platform activities like your block rewards and your transaction fees. Architecture, we look at property rights and how you distribute your tokens. And all these pillars are interlinked. So market design looks at the environment. Mechanism design looks at the rules of the game, so rules of the system. And token design looks at the incentives, the monetary incentives, and how can you further incentivize people with your tokens. So they're all interlinked. And in the next few videos, I'm going to dive deeper into each of the pillars, each of the components, as well as the different case studies and use cases. Here, if you have your phone, you can just take your phone out and you can scan the QR code. You can go to the link there, bit.ly/tokenomics-resources. So these are the resources that I've been referencing to come up with the framework that I've mentioned. And if you're interested in any of the specific details, you can go to the resource list to check them out, and they're in a more raw data form. So you have like academic articles and videos and Medium articles. So I will also link them in the comments below just in case you can't scan it. And now we're going to move on to the last part of this session, the common questions about the framework. So I am going to dive deeper into the different aspects of the framework in the next few videos, but this session is to give you a very basic introduction so that we can build a good foundation so that we can scale up faster and go in depth into the things that we want to talk about when we're talking about token economics. So some common questions to get the question marks out of the way, and then we can start building and designing and creating and learning. Firstly, the most common question I get asked all the time is, what about liquidity? What about valuation? What about token pricing? How do I change my tokens to fiat money or fiat money to tokens? Okay, good question. So when I talk about this ecosystem, this framework, I'm looking at the endogenous variables. I'm analyzing the endogenous variables. Endogenous means things from within. So when we talk about an ecosystem, or when we talk about anything, there are two kinds of variables. You've got exogenous and endogenous. Endogenous is from within, exogenous is external. So this framework is to look more at all the variables from within the ecosystem that affects the ecosystem, affects the pricing of the token, affects how people behave in the token, affects the environment of the token, or affects the environment of the ecosystem. And liquidity, valuation, and token pricing are all talking about external factors. Sure, they are important. A lot of people are talking about it, but the framework is looking at internal factors, internal variables. So I'm not going to touch on that now. I'm looking very specifically at internal variables. What the fuck has market design and its variables got to do with the framework? Good question. Because market design really defines the environment and how is it interlinked? So when we talk about thickness, okay, let's go back and check out thickness. When we look at thickness, something that we are always talking about in market design is network effects. Network effects is really the outcome, whereas thickness is the input. So when we can create thickness by having more participants, attracting people to the network, trying to create network effects, and the variables to create network effects, and then network effects is the outcome, right? So instead of saying network effects, I say the variable, because having thickness has higher probability of getting network effects. Next thing is congestion. So congestion meaning if I have two big packets of data that needs to be validated in the system, and the system is very congested, there are a lot of things going on. How can I reduce congestion? So maybe I can, by having a bigger size means you get approved faster, or if you pay more in transaction fee, you get to approve faster. Really defining the environment to see which packet gets to get approved faster. Safety is probably very straightforward. It's if people feel safe and people enjoy your system, or people think it's good enough to use, easy to use, and safe to use, people will use it. And it really goes back to the thickness, where you can create network effect and make people feel more comfortable to use your ecosystem. And that's why it has to do with the framework, because we're defining the environment in which your ecosystem flourishes. Okay, so why is it called network? Why don't you name it network effects instead of thickness? So as I mentioned, thickness is really the input variable, and network effects are the output variable. So you can't, with thickness you can also get a lot more things other than network effects. So with thickness you also can get partners in partners, or lock-in effects, or other different effects, and not just network effects. Okay, so what's the difference in consensus, allocation, and resolution? These are all part of mechanism, right? So under mechanism, and then you have a lot of big words over here. So consensus it's how you get agreement between all the majority people. How do you get agreement between all the participants in the game or in the ecosystem? Resolution is when something happens and you need to resolve the problem. what kind of methods can you use. So as I mentioned before, we can use stuff like your different smart contracts or different mechanisms that can be in place. Then you have allocation. So allocation is, we look at property rights. We look at how do you allocate the products, or how do you allocate responsibility, or where this is where also voting also comes in, and how do you allocate different aspects to the right participant. So that's differences. And where does block reward fall under? Block reward falls under the financial incentive of platform activities. What about game theory? So game theory is really, as I mentioned, the analysis of decision making, how to make proper decisions. And game theory is really an outcome based on mechanism design. So if you look at mechanism design, you look at the different kind of governance and incentives and structure. What they're trying to do is basically building the rules. And by having these rules, we can better understand what the outcomes are and what decisions are being made, which is game theory. So game theory is really the outcome of mechanism design.